Podcasts on unctv.org are made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNCTV.
Funding for In the Garden is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNCTV, and by the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at North Carolina State University. Additional funding is provided by the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, presenting TarHeelGardening.com, your online gardening resource for North Carolina plants, professional advice, and more.
Ever wonder where new plants come from? We'll answer that question and look at some cool new varieties of elephant ears for the garden. Hi, welcome to In the Garden. I'm Bryce Lane. If you're like me and a lot of other gardeners, you're always looking for that new plant introduction at the beginning of every gardening year. You know, new cultivars or varieties that have bigger flowers than the species, or maybe a different flower color. Maybe they have unique and different fruit than the species. Or better yet, the leaf pattern is different. Maybe it's variegated or has interesting color. Not only that, but you might be looking for a plant that's being introduced that's dwarf or mounded in habit, or weeping, or even upright. Well, folks, where do these new plant introductions come from? There are basically two ways. Now, the first way is through plant discovery. A plant either mutates or you find a chance seedling, and you cultivate that plant. Now, these mutations and chance seedlings often are found in a garden, maybe a nursery, or even in the wild. Now, the second way is through plant development via a process that we call plant breeding. Now, take, for example, this discovered plant. This is Solidago rugosa fireworks. Now, here's a cultivar that was introduced back in 1993. Well, in the 1970s, a group from the UNC Botanical Garden went to Wilson, North Carolina to rescue some carnivorous plants. And while they were there rescuing those plants from an auto shop that was being renovated, they happened to see the Solidago growing nearby. Now, it was unique and different than the typical species of Solidago rugosa, which grows tall and is somewhat rangy. Not only that, but look at the flower stalks. Notice how they extend out and hang down. Beautiful yellow flowers that kind of burst like fireworks, and you can see where it got that name. A plant that only grows about 2.5 feet tall and 2.5 feet wide, stays self-contained, where the straight species grows much bigger and is very rangy. Well, they collected that plant, brought it back to the botanical garden, and grew it. It doesn't come true from seeds. The seeds fall and they grow and they don't yield the same type of plant. So this plant has to be propagated vegetatively by cuttings or division. Well, in 1993, the UNC Bot Garden released Solidago rugosa fireworks into the nursery trade, and we home gardeners have been using it ever since. A beautiful plant. It's a herbaceous perennial that flowers late in August all through September with these beautiful fireworks display of yellow flowers. What a great example of a plant that was discovered basically on the side of the road. Plant breeding is a plant development technique that dates back to ancient times. Now, the basic concept behind plant breeding is that you would identify two plants that are similar to one another, that have unique and interesting characteristics. Take the pollen from one plant and pollinate the flower of another plant and collect those seeds. And look for an individual in the children that have even better characteristics, new properties that are unique and different. That's the basic concept behind plant breeding. So let me give you an example. Zinnias. Plant breeders have been breeding zinnias for years. Now, originally, zinnias are tall growing plants that grow 4 to 5 feet tall. They have one large flower for a big unit of area, highly susceptible to a disease called powdery mildew, where white material gets on the leaves, and those plants have a tendency to flop. Well, as gardeners began to prefer to plant mixed borders with lower growing plants, those zinnias really became out of fashion for the gardens. And so plant breeders began to take zinnias that didn't have very pretty flowers but were lower growing, and they would breed them with the plants that had nice flowers. Well, folks, look at the result of the years of breeding. Here is a low-growing zinnia with smaller flowers, but notice how there are more flowers that cover the area. The leaves are bright green with no powdery mildew because they're resistant to powdery mildew, and this really lends itself to a mixed border in the garden. Not only that, but they've developed lots of unique and interesting flower colors. Here's a beautiful orange, here's a bright yellow, and look at this white cultivar, a low-growing, creating a carpet of smaller white flowers that create that unique and interesting color. But a great addition to those mixed border gardens that we gardeners like to use, where the taller zinnias really wouldn't work, but these lower growing ones fit that spot, all as a result of plant breeding. We're at the Sandhills Research Station in Jackson Springs, North Carolina, an NC State facility where a lot of agricultural and horticultural research goes on. And I'm with Dr. Denny Werner of the Department of Horticultural Science and a good friend of In the Garden, who's a plant breeder and breeds a lot of new ornamental plants. In fact, Dr. Werner is responsible for the Ruby Falls redbud. Denny, thanks for having us out to the research station and showing us what you're up to with all these redbuds and whatnot. Could you tell us a little bit about how Ruby Falls comes about? Because I don't think people, when they buy a new plant that's been introduced, really understand the idea behind plant breeding.
Be happy to, Bryce, and thanks for coming out today. The first step in the process is making a decision about what one wishes to create. And in this case, about 12 years ago, we decided it would be interesting and worthwhile to develop a redbud that had the purple red leaf color and the weeping architecture.
And up to that point, there really wasn't one available.
There was not anything available in the trade.
Okay. Now, once you described the characteristics, where'd you go from there?
At that point, we assess the variation in other redbud varieties and decide which cross we need to make to combine those characters. In this case, we chose Forest Pansy, a purple leaf variety that has non-weeping architecture, and we hybridized that with Lavender Twist, which is a weeping variety with green leaves.
So one parent's got the red leaf, the other one's got the weeping characteristic.
Correct.
You say you hybridized them. What did you do?
We make controlled crosses by taking pollen off of one parent and placing it onto the ovary of the other parent. And we collect seed from that controlled cross, and that's called F1 or first generation seed.
Okay, so what do you do with those first generation seed?
We germinate those seeds, grow out those offspring, those trees, and put those in an isolation block, isolated from other redbuds on the research station, so that they can intermate and produce F2 or second generation seed.
Okay, I follow that clearly, but I'm looking at the isolation block of the F1 or the first generation. They all look like typical redbuds, green leaves and upright habit. What's going on there?
Correct. That's simply a phenomena of Mendelian genetics. The weeping character and the purple leaf character are recessive, so they don't show up in the first generation. Those trees, as you mentioned, are typical green leaf upright redbud trees, but they carry the genes for weeping and purple leaf. Those genes won't be expressed until the next generation, the second generation.
Which are represented like we're seeing here with all those seeds.
Exactly.
Okay,
yes.
so you take those seeds and what do you do with them?
We grow those out. We grow thousands of those seedlings out in seedling rows at very high density. And we walk those rows and look for those desirable recombinants that have the combination of traits that we're looking for.
Right, and so that's where you found Ruby Falls.
That's where we found Ruby Falls.
Obviously there were others that were weeping, but you picked this one because?
This was the individual that showed the best purple color and showed the best weeping habit.
And so what we're looking at here is the original.
This is the original tree of Ruby Falls.
Well, that's great, but now this is the original. How did I end up with one in my own yard?
You ended up with one as a consequence of grafting. Redbud is vegetatively propagated by grafting, and from this one original tree, nurserymen can propagate thousands, tens of thousands, depending upon the ultimate demand for the tree.
Well, I think there's going to be an ultimate demand for this tree, Denny. Ruby Falls is just stunning. And it's just a great way to understand, I think, now how this plant has come into the nursery trade. Well, Denny, there are all kinds of trees in this area. What are you doing here?
In this block, we maintain a collection of existing varieties and advanced selections from our program so that we can use them in future crosses for developing new combinations and new varieties. We're working with golden leaf form, variegated form, compact forms of redbud. This is our genetic block, so to speak.
Basically where you're going to see what characteristics you might use. It's really exciting to come through and see all of them. Thank you so much for giving us a good old-fashioned plant breeding lesson. I think we're all really impressed with how new plant introductions come about, and we just really appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
There are more ways than just plant breeding that lead to new plants coming into the nursery industry and ultimately into our home gardens. One of the ways is people will discover genetic mutations either in the wild or in the garden and then introduce those mutations as new cultivars. Well, this is Jeff Lewis, and Jeff is the gardens manager at the Elizabethan Gardens in Manteo, North Carolina. And Jeff, you've got a little story to tell about our native honeysuckle, isn't that right?
Sure, and this happened just by accident. This is basically our native coral honeysuckle, Lonistra sempervirens. And one day here on the island, I just happened across a plant that had one little branch, one twig, one sport of this beautiful orange color. I took one small cutting and rooted it, and I've been propagating it and growing it ever since.
Okay, now a sport is defined as like a genetic mutation connected to that rest of the plant. Is
Correct,
that right? Okay.
correct.
Well, so you selected it because of its color?
Exactly.
Well, tell us a little bit about its flowering habits as a vine. I know it's a vine, it grows on obviously fences and things like that, but when does it flower?
It's a really good coastal vine. It'll grow in almost pure sand. It blooms starting in spring, heavily in spring, and then sporadically through the summer, and then again a little more heavier in the fall.
Well, I noticed that the flowers, it seems like the buds are yellow and the flowers start out yellow and then turn that bright orange. Is that pretty characteristic of the plant?
It is. They just darken, deepen as they mature.
Okay, so you've discovered this new cultivar, you're propagating it. It's got to get a new name.
It's got to have a name.
What did you name it?
Well, I have the best daughter in the world, so I had to name it after my daughter. And a coworker suggested the dreamsicle. It's called Sarah's Dreamsicle. And, after the popsicle and after my daughter.
Well, that's a great name, and it really is descriptive of the plant. And I know you have it available at the gardens, at your garden center?
We do have it available here in the Elizabethan Gardens.
Well, Jeff also gave me a plant, and I've got it growing in my own garden. I want to tell you thank you so much, because I'm always looking for a new, interesting plant. It's a great thing. Now, folks, before you go in your own backyard looking for genetic mutations, remember this. A mutation like this, one, would have to be desirable, and two, occurs 1 in 50,000 plants. So the fact that you found this out in the wild is really very rare. I know a lot of times when people hear about this, they run out in the backyard looking for genetic mutations. Most of the time, we find these mutations in big nurseries where many, many plants are being grown. 50,000 a year, and all of a sudden you'll see one mutation. So you got a real find on your hand here.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing it with us. When it comes to introducing new plants to the home landscape, one group of plants that's great are the colocasias, the elephant ears. Now here's a group of plants where there always seems to be 2 or 3 new plants being introduced every year, either due to plant breeding or due to discoveries of genetic mutations that occur. Lots of cultivars to create a tropical looking effect in your landscape. And the elephant ears are marginally hardy from about central North Carolina east, and the further east you go, the hardier they get. But let's talk about some of the newer cultivars. Check this one out. This is one of my favorites. I just started growing it this year. This is one that was introduced just a year ago. This is Colocasia esculenta mojito. Now this one was discovered as a genetic mutation in Florida at a nursery that grows a lot of tropical plants called Agristarts. Now folks, take a look at the leaf and you can see why they've introduced this plant. Beautiful olive green leaf with flecks of maroon and purple on it, and then sometimes you'll see just a big blotch of discoloration of the dark purple. Just a splattering, if you will, on the whole leaf. Not only that, but if you look at the petiole, which is the leaf stem, you can see that that pattern with the burgundy color is accentuated along the stem. Now, Mojito is great for a partially sunny location, works out very well in a container or out in the garden. Now, here's one that was introduced in 2008. This one is called Maui Magic. Now, Maui Magic is a beautiful, beautiful colocasia that grows about 2 to 3 feet tall with relatively large leaves. And when the leaves come out, they're more dark burgundy or almost purple colored. And then as they expand, they turn this more obvious olive green with a little bit of rippling. Not only that, but take a look at the veins. You can see the veins stay that burgundy color. And the stems also are quite striking with that burgundy color. Wonderful for in the landscape and also in containers. Now, folks, if you look around, you can see I've got a number of different cultivars. Here's Black Magic down in front, but I've got it growing in a shady location and the leaves are more green. Behind me, cultivar Elena that was introduced about 4 years ago. And Elena was a discovery from a mutation and named after the discoverer's wife, Ellen. Colocasia esculenta Elena is this beautiful chartreuse color with flecks of darker green. It grows well in a partially shady location, but I've also seen it grow in sun. And look behind me, Thailand Giant. It's a huge, huge leaf that grows about 6 to 8 feet tall and is hardy from zone 7B to the east on higher zones. You look around, you can see other leaf types that are large and green with deep purple petioles. Over here to the left, a green leaf with a dark, rich center. Folks, look what you can do with these plants in your landscape. How about a mass planting of elephant ears like you see here, where they're all put together and there's this wonderful symphony of different colored leaves and heights of this tropical looking type plant. Or take them and place them out in your landscape. New introductions come every year, so be looking for them. They're very, very inexpensive when you buy them small, and don't worry about buying them small because when you do, they'll grow quickly in the warm, wet summers that we have here in North Carolina. A great plant for the home garden. Growing elephant ears in the home garden can be really easy. You just have to remember a few key points. First of all, you can grow them in the ground. Plant them in the springtime and watch them grow. They'll actually tolerate full sun, but they'll probably grow better in a partially shady location or partially sunny location. I've even taken to putting some of my elephant ears in full shade where they don't get any direct sunlight at all. Now, they don't grow as large, but they still grow and give that desired effect, that tropical look. Or you can plant your elephant ears in containers. Now, when you plant them in containers, it's very important to keep the soil moist. Of course, you've got to do that in the landscape as well. These plants really enjoy moisture, and one of the ways that I solve the problem of the hot summer and these pots drying out is I'll put a saucer in the underneath the container that allows excess water to accumulate. I'll also do this. I'll fill the saucer with water as well. That way, this plant, which is a big water user, will always have plenty of water to grow during the hot summer day. Now, I might have to do this every single day. That's the one thing you want to remember when they're out in the landscape. The soil's got to be able to hold moisture and be rehydrated easily, either by irrigation or by rainwater. Now, some of you are wondering about nutrition, fertilization. I recommend using a slow release material, beads that you would put on the top of the pot or out in the landscape. They're slow release, they last about 3 months, they slowly break down and release fertilizer to the root system. Or you could choose to use a popular organic material, a granular that you would put around the plant. It works more slowly and gets into the root system. The plants really grow well and respond to fertilizer. Or you can use just a good old-fashioned water-soluble fertilizer every 3 or 4 weeks. Add that to the pot or around the base of the plant in the landscape. Fertilization's not that difficult, and the plants really respond well to fertilizer. Now, some of you are thinking about, well, I'm not in a place where these would be hardy outdoors, or I'm not sure. Well, if you're marginal when it comes to hardiness, in the wintertime when these plants die back to the ground, just put a layer, 4 to 6 inch layer of mulch around the base of the plant, on top of the plant, and that'll help to insulate. Or you can wait until late fall, dig up those corms and store them in a cool, dry place like a crawl space or your garden shed where they won't be exposed to sub-freezing temperatures. The other thing you can do is actually take the container once the leaves have died down and put the container in that cool, dry place, store it for the wintertime, and bring it back out. Now, everybody also wants to know about propagation of colocasia. Well, they're real easy to propagate. You can propagate by division. where early in the spring, from a container or even in the garden, you go in and dig up those corms and divide them. If you look carefully at some of these plants here, Elena, you can see multiple stems, and each one of those main stems is connected to a corm all its own. Now, sometimes the colocasia will produce a pup or an offshoot that'll run along the ground, a rhizome, if you will. Look at this one on Elena. It's growing out, and you can see where it's swelling, and you can see little root initials. Take your pruners and cut to the outside or to the inside of that toward the main section of the pot, and there you have a small plantlet. Take that small plantlet, pot it up, and you've cloned your Elena colocasia. And that'll grow up and look just like the one it came from. So propagation is very easy. Folks, don't neglect to choose elephant ears for your home landscape, for their ease of growing, their ease of propagation, and their effect in the home landscape. Our plant of the week was suggested to us by Thomas Whitfield of Blowing Rock, North Carolina. Thomas, thanks for that suggestion, and we'll send you an In the Garden t-shirt. Folks, please send in your suggestions for a plant of the week to our website or our Facebook page, and if we use it on the air, we'll send you an In the Garden t-shirt as well. Well, Thomas suggested a great rose that's the result of over 35 years of plant breeding, and it's relatively new. This is Rosa Scarlet Flower Carpet, a flower carpet rose. Now, this is a group of roses called the New Generation Flower Carpet Roses that are woody plants that only grow about 18 to 24 inches tall in a mounded habit of growth and spread out. Now, these roses began their breeding program in Germany by a man by the name of Werner Nowak, and he started a breeding program to try to incorporate better disease resistance, more prominent flowering without having to deadhead in shrub roses. And his son Reinert is the one who came up with this rose in 2007. And so that represents well over 35 years of attempted plant breeding to create such a great rose. Highly disease resistant. You don't have to treat it for a lot of diseases. Grows low and spreads in a carpet-like fashion, henceforth the name carpet rose. It also flowers profusely from the beginning of spring all the way through into fall. In fact, some say that you can get as many as 2,000 individual flowers from this rose. So of course, the question is, where do you plant it in your garden? Well, here's a great plant for down in front, areas of plant beds where you need something low with lots of flowers all summer long. And here's a plant that requires full sun. But in the southern region of the United States, you might want to consider putting it in a partially sunny location where it gets no more than about 4 to 6 hours of sun per day. Now, another claim to fame for this newly bred rose is that it's heat and humidity tolerant. Unlike a lot of roses that suffer significantly from the high heat and humidity, this rose seems to grow very well. So you want to incorporate it into your landscape. There are a number of other cultivars of this series, not just red. There's scarlet, there's pink, there's an amber color, and you can really create a beautiful rose garden, if you will, by using a lot of these in the New Generation Flower Carpet series. It's a great plant of the week. Rosa Scarlet Flower Carpet, the red flower carpet rose. Well, folks, that's about all the time we have for this week. So until next time, I'll be looking for you in the garden.
To register for In the Garden, the course, call NC State's Distance Education Program at 1-866-GO-STATE. That's 1-866-467-8283. Or log on to distance.ncsu.edu. For more information about the program or to suggest a plant of the week, go to unctv.org/inthegarden.
Funding for In the Garden is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at North Carolina State University. Additional funding is provided by the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, presenting TarHeelGardening.com, your online gardening resource for North Carolina plants, professional advice, and more.
Podcasts on unctv.org are made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.